Okay, everyone, would you like to take your seats? As you can see on screen, Ursula von der Leyen is arriving with Olga Zelensky, so we may as well imitate the same. I know from last year it probably took about 10 or 15 minutes for things to get underway. Thanks a million. So look, while you're all taking your seats, just to say good morning, and you're all very, very welcome to this morning's State of the Union address. For those of you that don't know, although it's so great to see so many familiar faces, my name is Dermot MacDonald, and it's a real privilege for me to chair once again this morning's session, which, as we know, is being organised by the European Commission, representation here in Ireland by the European Parliament Liaison Office and the IIEA in Dublin. It's really wonderful to meet. I think last year it was all online, and so many of us, warm welcome to everybody who's joining us on YouTube. I know there were huge numbers who registered for that this morning, so thank you. And wherever you are, we hope you will be joining in the conversation with us later. Just a quick run on the running order. I'm going to briefly introduce our panellists. It all depends on how quickly events get underway. We will be switching as soon as the Parliament is ready to the live stream of President von der Leyen's address, her third such address. Possibly an hour, we're thinking, for the address to take place, but you will get a chance to take part in the discussion. Those here in Dublin in the audience can participate in the Q&A by just raising your hand and letting us know. Anyone else who's joining us on YouTube or elsewhere on the live stream, you can send in your Q&A through the Zoom function, and we will get to as many of them as possible. So submit them during the Q&A function, and whether you're here or elsewhere, do let us know who you are when we get to your question. For those who are in the room, just as a courtesy to our contributors, if you could put your phones on silent. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel, none of whom needs any introduction. To Bridget Laffan, Professor Emeritus and former Director of the Robert Schuman Centre for Advanced Studies at the EU Institute in Florence. You're very, very welcome, Bridget. Alice Mary Higgins, on my far right, is an independent senator in Shannon, where she leads a civil engagement group, and she's a member of so many committees: Environment, Climate Action, Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform. John O'Brien, who almost gave me a little heart attack because I didn't know where he was because he went to the wrong Mount Street. He is the Jean Monnet Chair in European Integration and Director for the Centre of European and Eurasian Studies at Maynooth. And last but not least, we are joined by David O'Sullivan, who is the IIEA Director General, amongst many, many other accomplishments. I think we can see a very, very prominent theme, which is going to set the scene for much of the address this morning. What I'm going to do is we're going to have just maybe some brief initial thoughts from everyone here on the panel, and as soon as we see it go live, we will join the address. Bridget Laffan, I might just start with you. Europe, it seems, and certainly since President von der Leyen has taken over, it seems to be one existential crisis after another. What are you looking out for this morning?
So the first thing I would say is we've actually got to stop using the word existential when it comes to the EU, because everyone says every crisis is existential and it survives them all. The EU is not an existential crisis. It will survive this one as well.
Significant challenges facing.
Huge. I would say this is a State of the Union speech like no other. It's at a time when Europe is at war, when war has returned to Europe. So I would say I would watch the tone. Let's see how she frames this, because she knows all governments are facing very sensitive issues as well. So what I would say we should pay attention to tone. And then I think in terms of what will be majored on, clearly Ukraine, and Ukraine in terms of geopolitics, because Europe has fretted a lot about geopolitics in terms of supply chains in China. That remains, but now it's hard geopolitics as well. Clearly the energy crisis, I think she will make proposals on energy. She has to. The ministers met last Friday. It's the top issue for the winter. And the broader social impact, inflation, the impact on families, the cost of living crisis and all of that. Clearly climate and climate transition. And then I would say she will remind the EU, the member states and the citizens, because I think she'll try to speak to the citizens as well today, that when Europe hangs together, when there's solidarity, then it's stronger. So I would say that she will argue that this crisis, Europe has to be united, has to be at one, and only if it's at one can it pull through. And then finally, I would say you'll get something from the conference on the future of Europe. I don't expect anything on Brexit, but some reference to the Queen.
And obviously Olga Zelensky, John, receiving an applause there this morning. There is now a State of the Union political bingo game you can play. You can guess what is going to come up in the speech. What do you think is not going to come up? What do you think might be omitted?
Well, energy, Ukraine, and tackling democracy. I think those are obviously the three things that are most important. I'd be very interested in the light of the revelations yesterday about Russia's sponsoring of extreme parties and disruption in democracies in the West, what she's going to say about that, because obviously there are member states of the European Union where the rule of law is in a pretty dreadful state, and there have been regular criticisms of the Commission that it hasn't acted sufficiently or sufficiently robustly to protect democracy in Hungary, Poland and elsewhere. It's a sensitive issue, ongoing negotiations with both Budapest and Warsaw about commitments that they have made around rule of law issues, but it's sensitive for a whole variety of reasons. And
there we are, very much on time this year. Let's cross over to the live stream, and we'll look forward to chatting to you when we get back.
Has this Parliament debated the state of our Union with war raging on European soil? And we all remember that fateful morning in late February. Europeans from across our Union woke up, dismayed by what they saw, shaken by the resurgent and ruthless face of evil, haunted by the sounds of sirens and the sheer brutality of war. But from that very moment on, a whole continent has risen in solidarity. At the border crossings where refugees found shelter, in our streets filled with Ukrainian flags, in the classrooms where Ukrainian children made new friends. From that very moment, Europeans neither hid nor hesitated. They found the courage to do the right thing. And from that very moment, our Union as a whole has risen to the occasion. 15 years ago, during the financial crisis, it took us years to find lasting solutions. A decade later, when the global pandemic hit, it took us only weeks. But this year, as soon as Russian troops crossed the border into Ukraine, our response was united, determined, and immediate. And I think we can be proud of that. We have brought Europe's inner strength back to the surface. And we will need all this strength. The moments ahead of us will not be easy. Be it for the families who are struggling to make ends meet, or businesses who are facing tough choices concerning their future. And let us be very clear, much is at stake. Not just for Ukraine, but for all of Europe and the world at large. And we will be tested by those who want to exploit any kind of division between us. And this is not only a war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine. This is also a war on our energy. It's a war on our economy. It's a war on our values. It is a war on our future. It is about autocracy against democracy. And I stand here with the conviction that with the necessary courage and with the necessary solidarity, Putin will fail and Ukraine and Europe will prevail. Today, courage has a name, and that name is Ukraine. Courage has a face, and that face is the face of Ukrainian men and women who are standing up to the Russian aggression. I remember a moment in the early weeks of the invasion when the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, gathered the parents of Ukrainian children killed by the invader. Hundreds of families for whom the war will never end and for whom life will never go back to what it was before. We saw the First Lady leading a silent crowd of heartbroken mothers and fathers and hang small bells in the trees, one for every fallen child. And now these bells will ring forever in the wind. And forever, the innocent victims of this war will live in our memories. And yes, she's here with us today. My dear Olena Zelenska, it took immense courage to resist Putin's cruelty. But you found the courage, and a nation of heroes has risen. Today in Ukraine stands strong because an entire country has fought, street by street and house by house. And we are seeing in the last days the bravery of the Ukrainians is paying off. Ukraine stands strong because people like your husband, President Zelensky, have stayed in Kyiv to lead the resistance, together with you and your children. You have given courage to a whole nation. You have given a voice to your people on a global stage. You have given hope to all of us. So today we want to thank you and all Ukrainians. Glory to a country of European heroes. Slava Ukraini. Europe's solidarity with Ukraine will remain unshakable. From day one on, Europe has stood at Ukraine's side with weapons, with funds, with hospitalities for refugees, and with the toughest sanctions the world has ever seen. Russia's financial sector is on life support. We have cut off 3/4 of Russia's banking sector from international markets. Nearly 1,000 international companies have left the country. The production of cars fell by 75% compared to last year. Aeroflot is grounding planes because there are no more spare parts. The Russian military is taking chips from dishwashers and refrigerators to fix their military hardware because there are no semiconductors anymore. Russia's industry is in tatters. And it is the Kremlin that has put Russia's economy on the path of oblivion. That is the price for Russia's and Putin's trail of death and destruction. And I want to make it very clear. The sanctions are here to stay. This is time for us for resolve and not for appeasement. This has to be very clear. The same is true for our financial support for Ukraine. So far, Team Europe has provided more than 19 billion euros in financial assistance, and this is without counting the military support. And we are in for the long haul. Ukraine's reconstruction will require massive resources. For instance, Russian strikes have damaged or destroyed more than 70 schools. 500,000 Ukrainian children have started their school year in the European Union, but many other Ukrainian children simply do not have a classroom to go to. And you told me yesterday, dear Olena, that every day when the parents are sending the children to school, they don't only give them the school bag, but also an emergency bag with water, with food, with band-aids, medical supply, with socks and an underwear to change. And just imagine you send in the morning your child to school, handbag to school, and you do not know whether you're going to be reunited in the afternoon after school. So, my dear Olena, I am announcing that we will work with you to support the rehabilitation of damaged Ukrainian schools. We will provide what you need. This is 100 million euros, because the future of Ukraine begins in the schools and with the children. We will not only support financially, but also empower Ukraine to make the most of its potential. Ukraine has already a rising tech hub and is home to many very young, smart companies. So I want us to mobilize the full power of our single market to help accelerate growth and create opportunities. Please remember, in March we connected successfully Ukraine to our electricity grid. It was planned for 2024. We did it in 2 weeks only. And today, Ukraine is exporting electricity to the European Union. So I want to significantly expand this mutual beneficial trade. We have already suspended import duties on Ukrainian exports to Ukraine. We will bring Ukraine into our European free roaming area. It's really time to do that now. Our solidarity lines are a big success, and building on all of that, the Commission will work with Ukraine to go a step further and to ensure a seamless access to the single market of the European Union. Our single market is one of Europe's greatest success stories. We know the power that lies in the single market. So now it is time to make it a success story for our Ukrainian friends too. And this is why today I'm going to Kyiv to discuss all this with President Zelensky and to show him what the single market is as a potential for Ukraine's future too. My honourable members, one lesson from this war is we should have listened to those who know Putin, to Anna Politkovskaya and all the Russian journalists who exposed the crimes and paid the ultimate price, to our friends in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia and the opposition in Belarus. We should have listened to the voices inside our union, in Poland, in the Baltics, and all across Central and Eastern Europe. They have been telling us for years that Putin would not stop, and they acted accordingly. Our friends in the Baltics have worked hard to end their dependency on Russia. They have invested heavily in renewable energy, in LNG terminals, in interconnectors. They made the experience, yes, this comes at a cost, but dependency on Russian fossil fuels comes at a much, much higher price. So we have to get rid of this dependency all over Europe. As you know, therefore, we agreed to join storage. We are now at 84%. That's good. We're overshooting our targets. But unfortunately, this will not be enough. We have to diversify away from Russia to reliable suppliers like the United States and Norway and Algeria and others. Two figures that are interesting. Last year, Russian gas accounted for 40% of our imported gas. Today, it's down to 9%. But we also see that Russia keeps actively manipulating our energy market. I mean, they prefer to flare the gas instead of sending it to Europe according to the contracts that are existing. So this market is not functioning anymore. And in addition, the climate crisis is heavily weighing in our bills. Heat waves have boosted electricity demand, droughts shut down hydro and nuclear plants, and as a result, prices have risen by more than 10 times compared to before the pandemic. making ends meet is becoming a source of anxiety for millions of businesses and households in the European Union. But we also see how Europeans are coping with this challenge. Think of the workers in ceramic factories in central Italy who have decided to move their shifts to the early morning to benefit from the lower energy prices. And just imagine the mothers and fathers among those workers having to leave home early when the kids are still sleeping because of a war they have not chosen. This is one example in a million of examples of Europeans adapting to the new reality. And I want our union to take example from its people. So reducing demand during peak hours will make supply last longer, and it will bring prices down. This is why we're putting forward measures for member states to reduce their overall electricity consumption. And then targeted support is needed for small and medium enterprises, like the glass makers across Europe who cannot longer turn on their ovens, or for single parents facing one daunting bill after the next if they look at electricity. Millions of Europeans need support. This is why we are proposing a cap on the revenues of companies that produce electricity at low costs. These companies are making revenues they never accounted for, they never even dreamt of. And don't get me wrong, in our social market economy, profits are okay, they are good. But in these times, it is wrong to receive extraordinary record revenues and profits benefiting from war and on the back of our consumers. In these times, profits must be shared and channeled to those who need it most. And therefore our proposal also includes the fossil fuel electricity producers who have to give a crisis contribution, and overall our proposal will raise more than 140 billion euros for member states to cushion the blow directly. These are all emergency and temporary measures we are working on, including our discussion on gas price caps. We need to keep working on lower gas prices. So on one hand, we have to ensure the security of supply. On the other hand, we have to ensure global competitiveness. The security of supply because the gas still has to come to the European Union, the energy of all. On the other hand, if it's too expensive, it's damaging our global competitiveness. So we will develop with the member states a set of measures to take into account the specific nature of our relationship with suppliers, ranging from unreliable suppliers to reliable friends such as our Norwegian friends, for example. I have agreed with Prime Minister Støre to set up a task force so that the teams work for this aim together to look how are we able to lower in a reasonable manner the price for gas. Another important topic is on the agenda. Today our gas markets have changed from pipeline gas we used to have in abundance mainly to increasing amounts of LNG gas. But the benchmark used in the gas market, the so-called TTF, has not adapted. So this is why the Commission will work on establishing a more representative benchmark for the electricity trading that really reflects this change in the market we have seen. And at the same time, we also know that energy companies are facing severe problems with liquidity in electricity futures markets. We will work with the market regulators to ease these problems by amending the rules on collaterals and by taking measures to limit the intraday price volatility. And we will amend the temporary state aid framework in October to allow for the provision of state guarantees while preserving a level playing field. This is very complex, This is not at all trivial, but I must say these are only the first steps. But because as we deal with the immediate crisis, we must also look forward. And therefore, my diagnosis is the current electricity market design that is based on the principle of merit order is not fit for purpose anymore. It's not just for consumers anymore. Consumers should reap the benefits of low-cost renewables. That must be the purpose. So we have to decouple the dominant influence of gas on the price of electricity, and this is why we will do a deep and comprehensive reform of the electricity market. Now, honourable members, there is one important point. Half a century ago, in the 1970s, the world faced another fossil fuel crisis. Some of us remember the car-free weekends to save energy. Yet, we kept driving on the same road. We did not get rid of our dependency on oil. And worse, fossil fuels were even massively subsidized. This was wrong, not just for the climate, but also for our public finances and for our independence as we know today. And we're still paying the price for that. Only a few visionaries understood that the real problem was the fossil fuels themselves, not their price. And among them were our Danish friends. When the oil crisis hit, Denmark started to invest heavily into harnessing the power of the wind. They laid the foundation for its global leadership in the sector and created tens of thousands of new jobs. This is the way to go. Not just a quick fix, but a change of paradigm, a leap into the future, and that must be our principle today with this crisis too, honourable members. Mesdames et Messieurs les députés, la bonne nouvelle est.
Ladies and gentlemen, members, the good news is that this necessary transformation has already started. It's taking place in the North Sea and in the Baltic, where member states have invested massively in offshore wind. This is taking place in Sicily, where the largest solar power plant in Europe will soon be producing the latest generation of solar panels. In northern Germany, regional trains are now running on green hydrogen. Hydrogen can change the situation completely for Europe. We have to move from a niche market towards a mass market for hydrogen. And with Repower EU, we have redoubled our objectives. We want to produce 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030. To achieve that, we need to create a new hydrogen market to fill the investment gap and to match supply and demand for the future. So today I will be announcing that we have created a new European Hydrogen Bank. This will help to guarantee the supply of hydrogen using money from the Innovation Fund. It will be able to invest 3 billion euros to help to construct a future hydrogen market. And that is how we will build the economy of the future. That is the Green Deal.
Et nous avons tous vu.
Over the last few months, we've all seen to what extent the Green Deal is important. Summer 2022 will remain in people's memories. We've all seen the dried up rivers, the burning forests, the extreme heat, and the situation is much worse than what we can see. The alpine glaciers have been an emergency reserve for rivers like the Rhone and the Rhine. But as Europe's glaciers are melting faster than expected. Future droughts will be much more serious. We have to work tirelessly to adapt to climate change and to make nature our first ally. That's why our union will push for a global agreement on nature that is ambitious when we go to the United Nations Conference on Biodiversity, which will take place in Montreal this year. And we will do the same at the COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh. But in the short term, we also need to be better equipped to face up to climate change. No country can combat the weather on their own and the destructive force of extreme weather events. This summer, we sent Greek aeroplanes, Swedish aeroplanes, and Italian aeroplanes to combat fires in France and in Germany. But these events are becoming more and more frequent and more intense. Europe needs more capacity. That's why today I announced that we will double our capacity for firefighting. Over the course of the coming year, the European Union will buy 10 light aircraft, additional helicopters to complete its fleet. That is European solidarity in practice.
Honourable members, the last years have shown how much Europe can achieve when it is united. After an unprecedented pandemic, our economic output overtook pre-crisis level in record time. We went from having no vaccines to securing over 4 billion of these life-saving vaccines for Europeans and for the whole world. And in record time we came up with SURE so that people could stay in their jobs even if their companies had run out of work. We were in the deepest recession since World War II, and we achieved the fastest recovery since the post-war boom. And all that was possible because we all rallied behind a common recovery plan. Next Generation EU has been a boost of confidence for our economy, and its journey has only just begun. So far, 100 billion euros have been disbursed to member states. This means 700 billion euros still haven't flown into our economy. Next Generation EU will guarantee a constant stream of investment to sustain jobs and growth. It means relief for our economy, but most importantly, it means renewal. It is financing new wind turbines and solar parks, high-speed train and energy-saving renovations. We conceived Next Generation EU almost 2 years ago, and yet it is still exactly what Europe needs today. So let's stick to the plan and bring the money to the ground. It has to be delivered because it's necessary now as investment. And, honourable members, the future of our children needs both. That we invest in sustainability, but also that we invest sustainably. We must finance the transition to a digital and net zero economy. And yet, we also have to acknowledge a new reality of higher public debt. We need fiscal rules that allow for strategic investment while safeguarding fiscal sustainability. Rules that are fit for the challenges of this decade. And therefore, in October, we will come forward with new ideas for our economic governance. Let me share a few basic principles with you. More flexibility on their debt reduction path. But there should be more accountability on the delivery of what we have agreed on. There should be simpler rules that all can follow. To open the space for strategic investments we need it, and to give the finance the confidence they need. So let us chart once again a joint way forward. With more freedom to invest, that's necessary, more scrutiny on the process. What has been agreed has to be done. More ownership by member states and better result for the citizens. So in short, let's rediscover the Maastricht spirit. Stability and growth can only go hand in hand. Because, honourable members, as we embark on this transition in our economy, we must rely on the enduring values of the social market economy. It's the beautiful, simple idea that Europe's greatest strength lies in each and every one of us. Our social market economy encourages everyone to excel, but it also takes care of the fragility as human beings. It covers the big risks of life, like poverty, sickness, age. It rewards performance and guarantees protection. It opens opportunities, but it also sets limits. And we need this today even more than ever. Because the strength of our social market economy will drive the green and the digital transition. And our Achilles heel for the small and medium enterprises are basically three things. It's, do we have an enabling business environment? It's the question, do we have a workforce with the right skills? And do we have access to raw materials our industry needs? This will be the three crucial questions to answer right now, to have a future with the model as I've described right now. We must, for our SMEs, remove the obstacles that still hold them back. They must be at the center of this transformation, because they are the backbone of our industry and Europe's long history of industrial prowess. And they have always put their employees first, even and especially in times of crisis. But inflation and uncertainty are weighing especially hard on them. This is why we will put forward an SME relief package. It will include a proposal for a single set of tax rules for doing business in Europe called BFIT. It will make it easier to do business in our union, less red tape, better access to the dynamism of our continental market, and, honourable members, it is high time that we revise the Late Payment Directive, because it's simply not fair that 1 in 4 bankruptcies, that's 25% of all bankruptcies, are due to invoices not being paid in time. This can't be possible. For millions of family businesses, we have to revise this Late Payment Directive. This will be a lifeline in troubled waters. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren Abgeordnete.
Ladies and gentlemen, members, the second big topic is the lack of staff for our companies. That's a major challenge for European companies. The number of unemployed has never been so low, 6.0%, 6% unemployment. But at the same time, the number of unfilled vacancies is at record levels. HGV drivers, airport staff, nurses, engineers, IT technicians, right from unskilled levels to the highest university degrees. We need people at all levels, and we need to invest more in further education and higher education. We need a careful knowledge of what staff are needed and how we can fill those vacancies. We need to combine that with the wishes of the workers for their own careers. We've got the ESF, that's a great instrument, and at the same time we need a structure that ensures that the money is effectively used. And there's another important point. We need to get qualified staff from abroad that can strengthen Europe's growth. So an important step is to ensure that these people can get their qualifications recognised more rapidly in Europe. That's one way to make Europe more attractive for everyone who's got skills and that want to be part of Europe. So I propose that the year 2023 should be Europe's year of education and training. That is the right priority. It's a step forward. Members, ladies and gentlemen, third point that's very important. Our small and medium-sized companies, all of our industrial sector, well, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about chips and augmented reality, storage for solar power facilities, but access to commodities, to raw materials, is decisive for the success of our transformation to a sustainable and digital economy. Lithium and rare earths are going to be more important soon than oil and gas are today. Our needs for raw earths alone, so rare earths alone, will be multiplied 5-fold by 2030. I think this just shows how rapidly we are moving forward on the European Green Deal. The problem is that at the moment there's just one country that almost completely controls the entire market. We need to avoid finding ourselves stuck in dependence of the kind of dependence that we now see with oil and gas. A lot of steps must be taken on that front, but trade policy comes into question there. We need new partnerships. Geographically, these raw materials are not just located in one place on Earth. We need new partnerships, not just to strengthen our economy, but also to pursue our interests and values at the global level. With similarly minded partners, we can work beyond our borders to improve labour and environmental conditions. We need new, reliable partners where we can mutually grow. The agreement with Chile, Mexico and New Zealand will be put forward for ratification, and we will continue negotiations with partners like Australia and India. We need to learn from the mistakes of the past.
Is only a first step. The processing of these metals is just as critical. And today, China controls the global processing industry. Almost 90% of rare earth and 60% of lithium are processed in China. So we will identify strategic projects all along the supply chain, from extracting to refining, from processing to recycling, and we will build up strategic reserves where supply is at risk. This is why today I am announcing a European Critical Raw Materials Act. We know that this approach can work, because remember, 5 years ago, Europe launched the Batteries Alliance, and soon 2/3 of the batteries we need we will produce here in Europe. That's a big success story. Last year I announced the European Chips Act, and the first chips gigafactory will break ground in the coming months. So we now need to replicate this success for raw materials. And this is also why we will increase our financial participation in the important projects of common European interest, the so-called IPCEIs. And for the future, I will push to create a new European Sovereignty Fund, because we have to make sure that the future of the industry is made in Europe. Honourable members, as we look around at the state of the world today, it can often feel like there is a fading away of what once seemed so permanent. And in some ways, The passing of Queen Elizabeth II last week reminded us all of that. She is a legend. She was a constant throughout the turbulent and transforming events in the last 70 years, stoic and steadfast in her service, but more than anything, she always found the right words for every moment in time. From the call she made to war evacuees in 1940 to her historic address during the pandemic, she spoke not only to the heart of her nation, but to the soul of the whole world. And when I think of the situation we're in today, her words at the height of the pandemic still resonate with me. She said, "We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us." End of quote. She always reminded us that our future is built on new ideas and founded in our oldest values. Since the end of World War II, we have pursued the promise of democracy and of the rule of law. And the nations of the world have built together an international system promoting peace and security, justice and economic progress. Today, this is the very target of Russian missiles. What we saw on the streets of Bucha, in the scorched fields of grain, and now in the gates of Ukraine's largest nuclear plant, is not only a violation of international rules, it is the deliberate attempt to discard them once and for all. That we have to know. And this watershed moment in global politics calls for a rethink of our foreign policy agenda. This is the time to invest in the power of our democracies. This work begins with a core group of our like-minded partners, our friends in every single democratic nations on the globe. We see the world with the same eyes. We share the same, and we should mobilize our collective power to shape global goods. We should strive to expand the core of these democracies. The most immediate way to do this is to deepen our ties and strengthen democracies on our continent. This starts with those that are already on the path to our union. We must be at their side by every step and every day, because the path towards strong democracies and the path towards our union are one and the same. And so I want to know the people of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia to know, and I think I speak in the name of this noble house, you are part of our family, you are the future of our union and in our union, and our union is not complete without you. This has to be the message. And we have seen that there is a need to reach out to other countries of Europe beyond the accession process. This is why I support the call for European political community, and we will set out our ideas to the European Council. But our future also depends on our ability to engage beyond the core of our democratic partners. Countries near and far share an interest in working with us on the greatest challenges of this century, such as climate change and digitalization. And this is the main idea behind Global Gateway, the investment plan I announced last year right at this place. It is already delivering on the ground. Together with our African partners, we're building 2 factories in Rwanda and Senegal to manufacture mRNA vaccines. So they will be made in Africa, for Africa, with world-class technology. And we are now replicating this approach across Latin America as a part of a larger engagement strategy that has to pick up now urgently. All this requires investment on a global scale. So we will team up with our friends in the United States and our friends in the G7 partners to make this happen. In this spirit, President Biden and I will convene a leaders' meeting to review and announce implementation projects for this investment. Honourable members, this is part of our work of strengthening our democracies. But we should not lose sight of the way our own countries. Foreign entities are our own countries. Foreign entities are funding institutions and institutes that undermine our values. The disinformation is spreading from the internet into the halls of our universities. Earlier this year, the University of Amsterdam shut down an allegedly independent research centre, actually funded by Chinese entities. And this centre was publishing so-called research on human rights, dismissing the evidence of forced labour camps for Uyghurs as rumours. These lies are toxic for our democracies. And let's think about this. We introduced legislation to screen foreign direct investment in our companies for security reasons. That's correct, that's good that we did it. But if we do that for our economy, shouldn't we do the same for our values? We need to better shield ourselves from malign interference. And this is why we will present a Defence of Democracy Pact. It will bring forward covert foreign influence. It will shed the light on shady funding. We will not allow any autocracy's Trojan horses to attack our democracies from within. For more than 70 years, our continent has marched towards democracy. But the gains of our long journey are not assured. And many of us have taken democracy for granted for too long, especially those who, like me, who have never experienced what it means to live under the fist of an authoritarian regime. Today, we all see that we must fight for our democracies. Every single day, every single minute. We must protect them both from the external threats they face, but also from the vice that corrode them from within. It is my Commission's duty and the most noble role to protect the rule of law. So let me assure you, we will keep insisting on judicial independence. And we will make sure that we protect our budget through the conditionality mechanism. And today I would like to focus on corruption with all its faces. The face of foreign agents trying to influence our political system. The face of shady companies or foundations abusing public money. If we want to be credible when we ask candidate countries to strengthen their democracies, we must also eradicate corruption at home. And this is why in the coming year the Commission will present measures to update our legislative framework for fighting corruption. We will raise standards on offences such as illicit enrichment, trafficking in influence, abuse of power, beyond the more classic offences such as bribery. And we will also propose to include corruption in our human rights sanctions regime, our new tool to protect our values abroad. Honourable members, our founders only meant to lay the first stone of this democracy. They always thought that future generations would complete their work, and that's true. We have to do that. It's an ongoing process. Democracy has not gone out of fashion, but it must update itself in order to keep improving people's lives. You will remember these words. These are the words of our friend David Sassoli, a great European. Democracy has not gone out of fashion, but it must update itself in order to keep improving people's lives. David Sassoli thought that Europe should always look for new horizons. And through the adversity of these times, we have started to see what our new horizon might be. A braver union, closer to its people in times of need, bolder in responding to historic challenges and the daily concerns of our Europeans, and to walk at their side when they deal with the big trials of life. This is why the Conference on the Future of Europe was so important. It was a sneak peek of a different kind of citizens' engagement, well beyond election day. And after Europe listened to its citizens' voice, we now need to deliver. The citizens' panels that were central to the conference will now become a regular feature of our democratic life. And in the letter of intent that I have sent today to President Metsola and Prime Minister Fiala, I have outlined a number of proposals for the year ahead that stem from the Conference on the Future. They include, for example, a new initiative on mental health. We should take much better care of our friends and partners and beloved ones. And for many who are burdened with anxiety and who are lost, appropriate, accessible, that's so important, and affordable support can be life-saving. We know that this support is not there today. Excessive, affordable, and appropriate support. So we have to make sure, with proposals on mental health, that we really improve in this subject. It is, for some of our fellow Europeans, life-saving. Honourable members, democratic institutions must constantly gain and regain the citizens' trust. Just like Europeans did when millions of Ukrainians came knocking on their door. What we saw was and is Europe at its best. A union of determination and solidarity. But this determination and drive for solidarity is still missing in our migration debate. Our actions towards Ukrainian refugees must not be an exception. They can be a blueprint for going forward. We need fair and quick procedures, a system that is crisis-proof and quick to deploy, and a permanent and legally binding mechanism that ensures solidarity. And at the same time, we need effective control of our external borders, in line with the respect of fundamental rights. I want a Europe that manages migration with dignity and respect. I want a Europe where all member states take responsibility for the challenges we all share. I want a Europe that shows solidarity to all member states. We have progress on the pact. We now have the roadmap, and we now need the political will to move forward and to match. Honourable members, 3 weeks ago, I had an incredible opportunity of joining 1,500 young people from all over Europe and all over the world that gathered in Tesi. They have very different views. They come from very different countries. They speak different languages. They have different backgrounds. And yet, there's something that connects them. They share a set of values and ideals. They believe in these values. They are determined to reach them. They are passionate about something that is larger than themselves. And this generation is a phenomenal generation. It's a generation of dreamers and makers. And in my last State of the Union, I told you that I would like Europe to look more like these young people. We should put their aspirations at the heart of everything we do. And the place for this is in our founding treaties. Every action that our union takes should be inspired by a very simple principle, that we should do no harm to our children's future, and that we should leave the world a better place for the next generation. And therefore, honourable members, I believe that it is time to enshrine solidarity between generations in our treaties. It is time to renew the European promise. And we also need to improve the way we do things and the way we decide things. Some might say this is not the right time. But if we are serious about preparing for the world of tomorrow, we must be able to act on the things that matter the most for people. And as we are serious about a larger union, we also have to be serious about reform. So as this Parliament has called for, I believe the moment has arrived for a European Convention. Honourable members, they say light shines brightest in the dark. And that was certainly true for the women and the children fleeing Russia's bombs. They fled a country at war, filled with sadness for what they had left behind and fear for what may lie ahead. But they were received with open hearts and open arms by many, many citizens like Magdalena and Agnieszka, two selfless young women from Poland. As soon as they heard about trains full of refugees, they rushed to the Warsaw Central Station. They started to organize. They set up a tent to assist as many people as possible. They reached out to supermarket chains for food and to local authorities to organize buses, to hospitality centers. In a matter of days, they gathered 3,000 volunteers to welcome refugees 24/7. Honourable members, Magdalena and Agnieszka are here with us today. Please stand up. Magdalena, stand up. Stand up. Their story is about everything our union stands and strives for. It is a story of heart, character and solidarity. They showed everyone what Europeans can achieve when we rally around a common cause. This is Europe's spirit, a union that stands strong together, a union that prevails together. Long live Europe. Thank you.
Back to the top of the room here for us. That's a part, so we'll have Bridget, Alice, Mary, John and David. We won't get to everything, obviously. David, at the opening, Bridget invited us to pay attention to the tone. It began with "we will be tested, we will prevail." The Ukraine crisis showed Europe at its best. What were your initial thoughts?
Well, I can be a bit cynic occasionally. 40 years of working in the European institutions. I've seen a lot of things come and go. I've written a few of these speeches. I have to say I thought that was genuinely inspiring. I thought it was a remarkable speech. I thought she really captured the mood. I think the Commission's communication skills have improved remarkably, Barbara, from the early days when we were very clumsy. I think it has. But I really just felt she really captured the mood. I mean, we can discuss, some of the details. I'm sure the proposal for a European Convention will have a few member states scratching their heads. But I thought, her basic emphasis on values, on what we stand for, on the challenge which the Russian war in Ukraine poses, not just to a military situation or the independence of Ukraine, but to what we stand for, what kind of future we have, the link between the energy crisis, climate change, the emphasis on the need to kind of have a new economic and social model, business model, to adapt to the changing situation. The reference to young people, of course, because I think we all know this is a very real challenge with a generation feeling perhaps that my generation hasn't left them in as good a shape as we were able to be. So I honestly, chapeau. I thought it was an excellent speech. And, you have to bear in mind that she's speaking in 3 languages. English is not her native language, but I really thought the only thing that disappointed me, if I may say so, was on the Parliament side. There were quite a few empty seats, mostly on the right-hand side of the hemicycle, but honestly, all throughout it, I thought the Parliament let itself down a bit there by not turning out in full force. I mean, if you go to the State of the Union in Washington, which I had the privilege to do on 4 occasions, I mean, it's literally there are people sitting on the steps. So I thought maybe that was a lost opportunity for the Parliament to assert its role. But otherwise, honestly, excellent performance. I mean, then we can discuss some of the proposals are controversial. Some of them will be, some of it will maybe not travel as far as we might like it to. But one of the best speeches I've heard from a president of the Commission in a long time.
Alice Mary, courage, solidarity, these were the big themes. That was certainly the frame within everything was set. It was amazing to see all the female leaders as they could, all out in their blue and yellow. Certainly that was the big support. But beyond Ukraine, and I suppose the connections between the Russian aggression and the energy crisis, looking at the temporary and exclusionary measures being proposed in respect of energy and the companies, and also her comments in respect of not just household but also SMEs facing what you described as both inflation and uncertainty. Do you think the speech delivered on what is, I suppose, heating and eating? I think we can reduce it down to is what most people are worried about going into winter.
I think there was really interesting. So on energy, a lot of it is some of which we knew coming out of the meeting of energy ministers, the direction. But I thought there were some very interesting things around energy, because there are those temporary measures that we've heard about. But she did also talk about that kind of almost structural reform of the market. So there's kind of those. It's interesting that we're seeing, the fact that the need for different measures in how, for example, gas is being treated and how renewables are. And in a way, it's a different. If you look just back 1 year, when you had the taxonomy and the kind of an attempt to kind of blend together gas and renewables, we are seeing this acknowledgement of very different strategies and very different approaches needed on both. And I was very struck by we had the car-free weekends, but the same road. So what I thought was interesting was these kind of emergency measures that are there, that idea of, the capping of prices and so forth, but also the recognition for the need for radical reform in the market. And I wonder, will it lead to a shift away from that gas approach? On the economic, the eating and, heating, the basic need piece was covered, but I must say I have a little bit of concerns just around some of how, there seemed to be a little bit of a rollback around towards the old fiscal rule framework. So the idea of, strategic investment being excluded. And there is a real debate there because, things like education that were being spoken about very strongly and repeatedly by the Commission President, some of those are not going to fit a strategic investment frame within, for example, the semester process and others, because they don't deliver an immediate financial benefit, but they're crucial for society. So I suppose the social spending piece, I'm left with a few question marks around, is there really support for social spending? Are we going to, for example, it was that idea of spending sustainably, but what about, the Sustainable Development Goals and this whole picture? Not all of them fit an investment return mechanism.
Just remind everybody, if they're using, there's 3 handles, at EU Ireland, at EP in Ireland, and at IIEA, and using the hashtag SOTEU22. Coming back to you, Bridget, obviously that 140 billion being promised by the crisis levy, or looking at the companies, but also this notion of a hydrogen bank and the delicate balance between reducing the gas dependency and particularly the Russian supply, but also trying to meet the the full-blown climate crisis that we're facing. That's a very, very delicate balance, and you could really see her trying to make those connections between both.
Absolutely, and of course, energy dependency which Europe walked into, and Germany in particular, has proved to be one of Europe's Achilles' heels. And now the shock of Ukraine means that that is being addressed, will be addressed. But of course, we also have the climate crisis. For me, I think the strategic actually matters a lot. Why? Because Europe needs to be, the world is shifting very dramatically, and Europe has got to be very strategic about its political economy, its energy. We're now in a time when Europe in 30 years will be determined a lot by what we do over the next 10 to 15 years. So I welcome anything that makes Europe more strategic, anything that makes Europe look at not to become protectionist, because that won't work, but understands that dependency, strategic autonomy has meat. And so I really welcome the strategic discussion around energy, because also it's intergenerational. If we don't get this right, the cost will be borne by the next generation.
Of course, was her final point when she was building up towards the European Convention, which we will get to. But it was interesting when you said not protectionist, and yet when she was talking in the context, Bridget, of the new European Sovereignty Fund, she was talking about a future of Europe made in Europe. Even the Critical Materials Act, it is not quite Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but you did get a sense of bringing it back home, a sufficiency on the continent.
So I think Europe is not saying no to globalisation. What Europe is saying now is shifting globalisation in certain ways that suit us better. In other words, breaking that dependency, because I can't remember the dependency on China was 90%. It was 60% for lithium and 90% for something else. But that's too high. That's way too high. That's handing China huge power. So, and the other thing I would say is we're also seeing an EU emerge where public finance plays a very important role in the future. There was historically Europe's main public power was regulation. That continues to be important. But here we're seeing the development of a public finance Europe that's very different to the old budgets that I wrote a book about in the 1990s. And that's something I think to watch. But I do think we are seeing, I've argued since Brexit, we have seen and are seeing a very new European Union emerge. And to me, everything she said today confirms the fact that Europe is trying, and it's extremely difficult because of heterogeneity and difference, to really respond to the world that Europe finds itself in, rather than the world that Europe would want. Europe always would prefer if the world was more like Europe. We now know it's not. So it's very good that the wake-up call in Europe, that the world, we now have to face a world that isn't entirely of our making, but we've to try to steer a pathway through that world. And none of this is easy. None of this. There isn't any easy public policy challenge here.
And that includes, I suppose, John, foreign policy, two major issues in respect of accession, but also democracy. She spoke of the need for a defence of democracy pact, and also huge support for Georgia, Moldova, for Ukraine at the heart of Europe. But even that is not as easy as it sounds.
No, it isn't. I agree with Bridget. The Commission set out an ambition at the beginning of von der Leyen's term to be a geopolitical commission, and I think we're getting there. It is becoming more strategic in all kinds of senses. But specifically on accession, I noted that, and I agree with David, it was the finest State of the Union speech that I have seen. But the language she used at the beginning about Ukraine was very, very emphatic, I think. And she came back to it when she spoke about defending democracy, attacking corruption within the European Union and so on.
which got huge applause.
It got a lot of applause.
Within Europe, within the continent, that she identified that, and I note that Emily O'Reilly also wrote a salient piece earlier this week pointing to issues of the need for Europe to get its house in order before it tells others, including accession countries.
I think the reason that you saw that kind of response in the Parliament is that the Parliament is to some extent significantly ahead of the Commission and has been very critical of the failures of the Commission over many years to adequately tackle on behalf of the EU the abuses of power that we have seen in Hungary, in Poland and elsewhere. I noted, however, on accession where she mentioned Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, she didn't mention the Western Balkans, to my mind. And this is the most fragile region of Europe. These countries were promised European Union membership in Thessaloniki in 2003. So they've been waiting 2 decades. They have essentially been flatlining along this trajectory of broken promises. There's absolutely no incentive for reform. Yesterday we saw an ultra-nationalist government in Serbia cancelling the Euro Pride festival, which is supposed to take place this weekend in Belgrade. It was merely the latest indication of just how distant Serbia is from membership.
And also just to hear John say, we'll continue to, defend the independence of the judiciary, as if that is something that needed to be said in the heart of Europe. I'm going to go to the panel because, David, you identified correctly what a lot of people would be interested in. We have a question from Anouk Moulin, who's a student in Rennes Political Science Institute in France. She says, firstly, she's very impressed by the solidarity shown to Ukraine and, in a way, she says, to Uyghurs. She said, I have a lingering question, as you had, after listening to President von der Leyen. What does the panel think she means with this European Convention? And could you explore what that goal and form of this initiative might be, not least because treaty change, of course, is accompanied by referenda, certainly in this jurisdiction?
Well, I think this is ultimately, one of the more difficult challenges we're going to face in the next few years, because as the President said, and I don't think John, I think we were a bit harsh, I don't think she mentioned the Western Balkans. They clearly, we have, I think it's 10 countries lined up for accession. She didn't mention Turkey, which is a candidate country, but where things are not going very well. It is clear that if we are talking about a further expansion of the European Union of that scale, we need internal reform. We are not capable of absorbing 10 new countries with our existing structures and systems. But nobody really wants to engage in that discussion, and this is the challenge. What she meant by European Convention, she specifically mentioned it strangely, I thought, about intergenerational solidarity. It seemed to be a rather limited thing, because if you start a discussion about reforming the treaties, it will run much broader than that.
What she actually said was it's time to enshrine solidarity between generations in our treaties,
yes.
Full stop, and then the moment has arrived for a European Convention. So I was trying to see.
Yeah, I'm assuming that, yes, she was specifically mentioning that, but she knows, as everyone does, that if you launch a European Convention on institutional reform and treaty reform, it will have a much broader agenda.
Alsmere, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I was a member of the Future of Europe process, and I suppose I'm looking to, some of the focus was around the things that involve treaty change, but there was a lot of other recommendations, some of which we're still seeing, which there's no obstacle to moving forward on, that haven't yet been moved forward on. So I suppose when we saw it, I was wondering, is that the youth test that has been promised? How much progress could be made on the youth test, without or previous to a convention? The fundamental rights. So one of the issues, if I look to the issues that had really strong messages from those participating, that idea of, most people already think in Europe, we found that the Charter of Fundamental Rights is part of the rule of law, but of course it's not, and that's why in the rule of law engagement at the moment with Hungary, Poland, it's focusing on procurement, on corruption, on the financial issues, whereas a lot of the public concern has been on those issues of the breaching of fundamental rights. So, is it a convention around the protection of fundamental rights? Is that what we mean by do no harm? Or is there going to be something pushed out front, and then there's a whole load of other issues that are probably more controversial that maybe weren't talked about in terms of the convention around the processes? So I think it's one of those areas where more definitely needs, but the principle of a convention has been pushed for by the Parliament. The question of, Is it a convention about how we work? Is it a convention around strengthening those individual rights? And for me, I certainly had a sense that there were certain issues supported more from the Convention on the Future of Europe than others.
It was sort of a big tease at the end.
It was very much a tease. Is the youth test going to be the showpiece?
I think it's probably what is
convention.
the convention probably, or what does it mean? Bridget, can I go back to you just on the Green Deal agenda, which I know is a subject that is close to your heart, because you read the business pages, there are countries that are trying to prevent a Lehman-like response, huge liquidity crises for many companies that are facing collateral obligations. Some of the things that she was talking about, the measures, both on a standalone basis and collectively, are actually, you're talking about major structural reform to key utility markets. And speaking to that earlier discussion, does it have the institutional and governance capacity, do you think, to address all of that? Because those are things we can try to tackle immediately, but that have long-term market implications.
Absolutely. So I think that what the war in Ukraine has done is it has exposed and made more urgent the climate issues and the acceleration of the climate crisis itself. But it has also exposed the pain involved. In other words, this is the mother of all collective action problems. I think what she was saying about the market for electricity, that's been on the agenda for ever and ever and ever. In my last life in Schumann, we had what was called the Florence School of Regulation, which was set up after something called the Florence Forum on Electricity Markets, which started tackling the the monopoly problem. And of course, these are very big monopolies, they're very powerful and very hard to change. But now we're in a new game and there's a new stage. And Europe has tended to find the governance capacities, either formally or informally, and also cross the levels when it needs to. So I would expect that it will. I think it'll be extreme. It is very urgent and will be addressed. But the struggle in Europe will be the impact of all of it, not just on our SMEs, but on each of us as individuals, households, and all that. And
Paris turning the lights out when the last visitor goes,
exactly.
The Eiffel Tower, yeah.
The kind of all of that, and so I think that's such a big societal shift that it requires more than government. That's a pact with society to change how we are. And of course, what Europe does on the climate crisis in and of itself is simply not enough. So that's also the partnership with other parts of the world. But I do think what we've seen in an accelerated way over the last number of years is we can't hide from the climate crisis anymore.
No. Can I just before we go, and I will be taking questions, I want to go to Alice and John on an issue relating to the rule of law. It was interesting. We can't get through the entire speech, but when she was talking about that incident in Amsterdam last year, the creation of various institutes, the disinformation campaign is not just being waged by bots outside of the union. It is very much something that is alive and central here. And although courage, solidarity were the big themes, the energy crisis, the general political division, the culture wars, everything is a challenge to social cohesion within the Union.
Yeah, on China, I think the EU has been late to wake up to the nature of the threat, but it has. And the Amsterdam case was replicated here in Ireland, you may remember, when an academic at UCD who was raising serious issues about human rights, the treatment of the Uyghur population, for example, in Western China, we then saw the Chinese government try to put pressure on the Department of Foreign Affairs and the government. To the great credit of his department, Bridget's old department, they absolutely supported him solidly. But it's an indication of the insidious ways in which China has tried to insert these soft power instruments into the member states of the Union. So I think we have to be very careful. The universities, I think, really should do a complete inventory of all our links with China. And I would suggest that we should divest almost completely from China, because we'll be in the same sort of situation that many were in terms of their institutional links with Russia, because Xi Jinping's kind of much more muscular Chinese foreign policy suggests that that problem is certainly not going to go away, and it's probably going to get worse in the years ahead.
Can I just on Alison Murray, just on that social cohesion, particularly when the reality is winter is coming and people are going to be under so much pressure, as President von der Leyen said, we will be tested.
Yeah, so just really quickly though on the human rights piece, because I did want to add in, it was something we do need that human rights regime that was tested, that there is consistency around the human rights testing. So we know that, you know, there's a rightful, you know, move away from Russian gas, but we also need to be looking at the human rights issues in relation to Saudi Arabia and for example, in relation to, there are concerns around, even under REPowerEU, some of the agreements signed, for example, with Israel, that are not as clear about occupied territories. So there's a few, I think for Europe to be strong on that human rights piece, we will need to be shown to be applying it very strongly in all of our agreements. And of course, in terms of things like lithium, that's going to be, we know that the trade agreements with Chile are being renegotiated, and that's going to have to be, you know, there's been some concern. I saw the
You talked about the need to build up strategic reserves.
Yes, and in terms of being strategic is really important, but it's also important there's a strong ethic in that. And I thought, you know, we saw the decolonise Russia poster that is there. When we talk about the world that Europe finds itself in, Europe did shape a lot of that world, and it's to acknowledge that, and that's where things like going and having an impact in the climate talks will mean that Europe and Ireland need to be contributing around things like the climate justice, and the 100 billion followed in that regard. But on social cohesion, and that's when I say strategic, I'm not saying let's not have strategy. The question is, what do we mean by strategic? And I think it was acknowledged the errors, the years it took in terms of the financial crisis, partly because there was not enough strategic emphasis placed on social cohesion. And that was something that then in the COVID crisis, Europe said social cohesion needs to be a priority. So when we talk about strategic, I'm just saying it's very important that in our financial solutions and our instruments, even especially in the changes to our economic governance, that we make sure that social investment in social cohesion is recognised as strategic as well. And I think that's going to be crucial. It's good that there's going to be pricing impacts from the energy piece. I think the idea of that collective public spending, I think that the return of public spending for making the changes we need, as was mentioned.
We didn't even get, I think there was 100 billion spent under the Next Gen, about 700 million to go.
And I think that's really positive as well.
I'm going to, is there a mic for everyone in the room? There is, so put your hand up. Before I come to you, David, I'll give you an easy question here from Paul O'Dwyer, formerly of the Department of Finance. He wonders whether the rapid deepening of EU integration in response to recent crises is leading us. He wants to know, where is that leading us? He said, are we seeing the emergence of a European superstate? So an easy one for you.
No, look, I really, this European superstate is a complete myth. It's not the model we're following. What we are doing is building something completely unique in international relationship, which is building a voluntary union of sovereign states who act collectively where it delivers better outcomes than can be delivered by individual countries. That's what it is. So it's wrong to compare it to a country like the United States or like France or like or even a federal state like Australia or Canada. That's not what we're doing. And we have to stop constantly trying to make it look like it is a country. We're building a unique model, and we have to find unique ways of doing it. That reflects the institutional setup. We have to also recognize that our people are deeply attached to their national identity, their language, their history, their culture. People do not want to lose that. But on the other hand, as the President said, we absolutely know that as individual countries, we are much less powerful, much less capable of delivering for our citizens than when we act together. But you have to demonstrate that case by case, and it changes. Who would have thought we would have had common procurement on vaccines until the pandemic came? Now we have to reform our energy market in a way which will be much more integrated because of the war in Ukraine and because of the consequences, and for climate change. So it's an evolving process. There will be a tendency, if we enlarge further, if we get to, I think it's potentially, at the moment it's 10 countries are sort of candidate stages. That takes us to 37 countries. that's not going to be, a federal state run with a central government. So this balance between doing things collectively at a central level with real institutions, with a rule of law and governance over those institutions, but at the same time maximizing the autonomy and the capacity of individual countries to choose their own way of life is the model.
Are you okay for about another 8 to 10 minutes, because I do want to get to everyone on the floor, if you're okay with that, Barbara. There's a lady here just in the third row, and again, if you just let us know who you are and where you're from as you pose your question to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invite. It's great to be here with European and global friends. My name is Mari Skåre. I'm the Norwegian ambassador. So I'm very happy to partake in this discussion and listen to this speech, which was really, really very good. Norway and the EU enjoys a very close partnership. Of course, the IIEA is the fundament for this, but we have also 70 other agreements between Norway and the EU, and we are like-minded in foreign policy and security policy and solidarity with Ukraine and so on and so forth. So we share the objectives, we share the visions, we stand solidaric. And we, of course, we are a reliable and predictable partner to the EU, not only in the current energy crisis, but also with the visions for the Green Deal, in democracy, rule of law. And I would encourage all our EU colleagues to engage with us at the political level, of course, but also at other levels, because we need to prepare the decisions. We need to engage in this discussion if we're going to find a way out of the current crisis. I would like to ask the panel how you see Norway as a predictable partner and solid partner to the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador John.
For sure, Norway is a truly important
Hand up if you'd like
partner.
to. Yeah, I'm going to try and keep everyone going while you answer. So put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
I also note that Norway has been incredibly generous to Ukraine, looking at financial dispersals and things of that in recent times. I note also that Norway might have been a member. We're coming up to our 50th anniversary membership. Norway had that choice, but I mean, it's locked into a relationship with the European Union that's very positive for both sides. And I think the Ukraine war has only enhanced all of that. It's not just about Finland and Sweden changing their minds about NATO, Denmark closer to European security policy, opting into that. Norway is also part of this because it's part of that ring of structures that surround the European Union. It's all for the good, in my view.
That's great. Have we any more questions from the floor? Don't be shy. This gentleman here in front, and actually this gentleman at the back. So we'll take those two questions and throw them to the panel. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Andy Maguire from TU Dublin. I'm asking a question maybe similar to Norway, but it's with relevance to Ireland. I have 4 children. They emigrate. They're emigrating during a good time. They emigrate to the Anglo-American countries. They don't emigrate to Europe, where there's, as the President said, there's shortage of labour. They're highly skilled. They're from a very good background. And if you're from Balbriggan or Ballydehob, I think if you're going to emigrate or if you're going to leave the island, the tendency is to go to Anglo-American cultures. So how can we, I'm a completely affirmed European, had the pleasure of studying in Leuven, lived in Italy, how can we, as an island or Ireland, contribute more to Europe and get ourselves more in the European vein? Because we might end up becoming a small little talking shop, not really of relevance.
Yeah. I might throw that to you, Bridget, having been in Florence and being at the heart of that. We didn't get to everything, but obviously education and skills was a major part of this. You said 2023 had to be the year of education and training.
So I think the answer to your question is that migration tends to follow migratory pathways. And so if historically, in an earlier period of European history, the Irish went to the continent and then they started to go both to the Anglo world. So I think there's that. I think it's English. Yes. It's the ease with which Irish people can rock up to an English-speaking country and settle in. And there's not just a resistance to language acquisition in Ireland now, but the numbers doing French and German are down. And I think that's an enormous problem, not just for us in terms of skills and education, but just culturally.
Yeah.
I think just culturally it impoverishes us to be locked into predominantly into an Anglo world. But I would say also don't underestimate the number of Irish people across the continent. Yeah. There are 50 plus Gaelic football teams on the continent. That means there are a lot of Irish in a lot of places. So I understand the draw of English, but I think there are migratory flows to the continent as well, and very vibrant Irish communities in Brussels, in Italy where I lived. The Irish were there too. So, but I do think language acquisition in our educational system is something. Also, for the other big issue for the Irish is the generation, David's generation, are leaving or have left the Commission, and we now need people to take jobs in the institutions who are good enough, have the language skills to get those jobs, because if we don't, we lose soft power. And it's of immense importance that Ireland has sufficient numbers of high quality people in the institutions at senior ranks. If we don't, it's a problem.
Okay, this gentleman here to our left. Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks very much, and thank you for the event. It's very, very nice to be out at an in-person event. I keep saying it. Dúil Tóibrín from Meta, and I'm going to ask probably an unfair question, given that we've all just heard about the convention and the reform. But would the panel care to speculate on what type of timeline we might be looking at? If we're talking about the type of targeted reform potentially that Senator Higgins mentioned, or a broader piece. Thank you.
David, what do you think, just in terms of
how
that?
long is a piece of string, you know? I mean, look, we've been here before. We know that there will be a lot of resistance from member states because it doesn't really fit with national politics in any country at the moment. Nobody wants to have another referendum on Europe. So there will be resistance. On the other hand, there's an issue there that needs to be addressed, and it's not going to go away. So my guess is eventually it will be set up, but it will take time, because it will need a moment when people feel we've arrived at a point where you can have this debate nationally, and we're not there yet. It's clear. So we're probably talking about several years, in my view, and certainly before you would get to a text of amending the treaties, you know, that's going to take. This is a medium-term project. But I think what was significant was that she had the courage to call for it. And what impresses me with President von der Leyen is, you know, she's more often than not slightly ahead of the posse on a number of issues, on candidacy for Ukraine, on the reform and recovery fund, on the procurement for the pandemic. So she does take some risk, because, you know, the member states are not necessarily going to follow you. And I've worked with many presidents of the Commission. You're always nervous if I go out there and say we should do this, and then everyone says no. But she takes some risk, and I think today not only was it a fine speech, but she had the courage to put that out there. It's a controversial issue, and it won't immediately take root. But we will remember that this was perhaps.
I think it certainly had a desired effect, because we're all talking about it. Barbara Nolan.
Yeah. Hello, Barbara Nolan, Head of the European Commission representation here. First of all, I'd like to thank all the audience for coming, our panel. I think I would agree with David that, you know, it was, I think, one of the best, if not the best speeches I've seen. I would say that, wouldn't I? You would. In the immortal words of Mandy Rice Davis or whoever said it. But I do think that it was a courageous speech. I think it struck the right tone. I'd just like to come back, John, on what you said. In fact, I'm reading the line here.
Yeah, she did mention
so
that.
I want the people of the Western Balkans, of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia to know you are part of our family, your future is in our union, and our union is not complete without you. So she did mention it. I think, to be fair, she is she's been really at the forefront of recognising the importance of the Western Balkans and the importance of bringing them into the European family and stabilising the situation. So I think, you know, she's sort of stuck her neck out, if you like, on that at a time when maybe other heads of state and government aren't so convinced that this is the right time.
Within the council and not within.
I am determined to get you out by 9:40, so very, very quickly I'm going to go to the panel. We're mid-term, but it's a term like no other. So just from each of you, just some concluding remarks before we bring the event to a close.
I think she's been a very good president. I think putting climate change at the heart of the Commission's programme was the right thing to do. We've seen it replicated in the COVID recovery funds. Climate change spending is about a third or more of what governments are spending. But to go back to our last point, there's only so much that the Commission can do. It can set the agenda, it can put policy proposals out there, as it did with the energy proposals last week. But as ever within the Union, a system of divided government, it is very, very difficult to reconcile, even within the Council, 27 different national positions, and then to match the ambition that's often put out there by a Commission President in these proposals.
Alice,
but I think it's more or less a positive report card at half-time.
And for you, Alice Murray?
I think it is around making sure that those wider frames, that go wider than the EU, the human rights frame, for example, that is kept piece. So migration was mentioned in that, and I thought it was interesting. She mentioned there's going to be negotiations around the Migration Pact for the next 4 presidencies. It's been signalled.
Ukraine.
It's not, and so it's not just Ukraine. That idea of that being a model for was very interesting to me in terms of, does that mean that we're putting a kind of human centre? And that came out of the Future of Europe very strongly. Then within our energy policy, again, climate. So you have to look to, there's things that we can do in terms of in Europe, but that we frame it within that wider human rights frame internationally, and within the wider, you know, we said existential is overused. Not in terms of climate crisis, it is in that sense. So I think that's crucial, even, and there are a lot of battles still. You know, the hydrogen strategy, is that going to be green hydrogen, or is it going to be a last other pass for the gas industry? You know, there's a lot of debates within what she said, but I think, I did think it was a strong speech, and I think it opened up and made clear lots of key decision points, and I think it'll be over the next year and 6 months that we see unpack what the different arguments are within them.
Yeah, David, the State of the Union, it is sort of something of a US import, but how important do you think it is for the legislative agenda? And when, you know, she's talking about, you know, new iterations of the CHIPS Act, you know, for lithium, for other critical materials and stuff. What do you think are the chances of realistically in implementing many of the things she outlined today?
Well, I mean, if you watch the State of Union speech in America, you know, it's an event in and of itself. It tends not to have much of an impact afterwards, right? It's a media show. She has borrowed some of the elements, the special guests, the kind of trying to make it personal. You know, the reference to the 2 Polish girls and their work for refugees. But I think she has announced that this commission has honestly produced fantastic output under huge pressure. And I honestly think they have delivered. I think the challenge, the tectonic plates are shifting internationally, and we have to define what that means for the EU 27, what it means for our neighbourhood, those of our neighbours who never want to be members or unlikely ever to be members, the UK, Norway, Switzerland, but who are still strong partners, those of our neighbours who want to join, and how do we manage that? And how do we then fit internationally, United States, China, Russia, obviously, in a very difficult place at the moment. This is the challenge, and at the same time meeting the issue of climate change, which is the single greatest challenge we face. And I think this Commission has done a good job of framing that. Then, you know, can we agree at 27? More often than not, yes, but never quite to the level of expectation which is made in the speech.
And the last word to you, Bridget Laffan.
So I think we haven't spoken at all about the fact she's a woman, and I think that has really mattered to her commission. She's the first woman president of the European Commission, but much more, it's the tone she strikes. She at ease talks about children, she humanises it. And I think that's been really important for this phase of European integration. So I think the fact she's a woman has actually had an impact and matters, not just symbolically, but much more substantially.
And that is where you began. Indeed, at the beginning you were talking about tone. And that is all we have time for. I want to, on your behalf, to thank Mary Alice, David, Bridget and John. Thank you to our hosts, obviously the European Commission, the European Parliament Liaison Office and of course the IIEA. It's great to be with you all again. Finally, thanks to you all for turning out in person and all of those hundreds of you on YouTube. So thank you, and that brings to a close the State of the EU 22.
Thank you.